Hello, coaches, and welcome to the Coach C Basketball Analytics Podcast. Today, I want to talk about a player development philosophy that has been part of my coaching throughout my career. Develop the basketball player first, and don't allow height or a position to limit what that player can become. For me, player development starts with teaching. Coaching is teaching, and developing what I call specialists of the sport has always been part of my teaching philosophy. It is not only about what skills we want players to learn, but also how we teach those skills so they can be applied in the game. I was brought up as a player in the international club system where developing the skills of the game was part of our basketball culture. We were taught to dribble, shoot, pass, finish in different ways around the basket, and most importantly, understand the game. We were coached to know why we were doing something, how to read the game, and how to react to what was happening on the floor. And because we practiced before the professional team, we had an example in front of us every day. We watched how those players trained, how they performed the skills of the game, and how they understood the game. They gave us a picture of who we wanted to become and how we wanted to play when we reached their age. That stayed with me first as a player and later as a coach. It became part of the way I teach and develop players. As a result of those experiences, fundamentals, teaching, and understanding the game became part of my coaching DNA. They gave me a strong foundation when I became a coach. Throughout my coaching career, including my work as a consultant and through coaching clinics, I often observed two problems that concern me about player development, especially during the formative years. The first was that many players were not being developed individually. When a young player was tall, coaches often placed that player in the post. Many times that player was still growing and had not developed the coordination and motor skills of the smaller players. I also saw that tendency continue into JV and varsity levels. Part of the problem was the urgency to prepare teams for competition and the overemphasis on teaching strategies, often at the expense of individual skill development. The second problem was that players were being taught to memorize plays without really understanding why. They learned where to go, where to cut, and where the next pass was supposed to go, but not necessarily how to read the game, react to what the defense presented, and make decisions on their own. Both problems were tremendously detrimental to player development. For the taller player who was still developing coordination and motor skills, the consequences could be even greater. Some were cut, others had very little success, rarely received the basketball, and sometimes were even made fun of because of their lack of coordination. Some eventually lost interest in the game and stopped playing. I saw that happen too many times. The overemphasis on half-court team practices and memorizing plays limits creativity and the player's ability to understand the game. Players learn predetermined movements, where to go, where to cut, and where the next pass is supposed to go. The game becomes patterned, robotic, and predictable. That is completely contrary to my basketball analytics philosophy and the way I teach and coach. I want players to understand the game, control the fundamental skills, and learn how to use those skills according to what the game presents. In a fast, full court game, the space is constantly changing. The time available to make a decision is changing, and the speed of execution is changing. Players have to react and make decisions based on those situations. That is why I don't allow a player's height or position to limit which skills that player develops or where that player can perform on the floor. But if that development is not taking place within the team setting, many times the player has to find it somewhere else. Private coaches and basketball academies have increasingly filled that gap by spending the time teaching individual skills that players may not be receiving within their school programs. I experienced that through my own basketball academy. I worked with players who needed that additional teaching and development, including players who had already been cut from other teams. And that raises an important question. Are we evaluating only what the player can do today, or are we limiting what that player can become just so we can complete passes A through D of a set play? Later, as a consultant at the college level, I had the opportunity to work closely with coaches at a few Division I programs. Part of my role was to observe and assist with player development, team play, efficiency of performance, and using combo defenses more effectively. In conversations with coaches who shared similar views on player development, we often discussed how much development was still taking place once players reached the NBA. Players were reaching the professional level and still improving important parts of their game. For me, that reinforced something I had believed throughout my career. Development doesn't happen simply because of player practices. It has to be taught. And that is at the foundation of what I call developing specialists of the sport. By that, I don't mean a player who specializes in one position. I mean a basketball player who develops control of the fundamental skills of the game and learns how to use those skills according to the time, space, and speed available on the floor. The game doesn't always give a player the same amount of space or the same amount of time to execute. Around the basket, the space may be short and the reaction has to be quick. On the perimeter, there may be more space to attack. In transition, the player may have to control the ball, pass, finish, or make a decision while moving at full speed. That is basketball in the analytics era. And that is how I believe the skills of the game should be taught. That is why full court game-like drills became an important part of my teaching methodology. I believe the same skill development goals can be achieved under the intensity and demands of the game, with shorter recovery time and decisions made at game speed. I also believe in repetition, but not repetition of the exact same drill until the player simply memorizes it. I want repetition of the skill in different situations and different settings. The skill is repeated. The drill is not always the same. That keeps the player learning, reacting, and applying the skill instead of simply memorizing the exercise. The drills have to be congruent with the way we want to play. I don't train players to become globetrotters. I don't care how many moves a player can make if those moves don't have a basketball purpose. If we are developing ball handling, there has to be a purpose. Attack the basket, create a shot, create a pass, or advance the basketball. The same applies to shooting, finishing, passing, and filling the access lanes to the basket without predictability. For me, simplicity of performance and effectiveness are more important than complexity. And those skills should not be limited by a player's height or position. I remember coaching a 6'6" and moving him to the point guard position. His father approached me and told me I was destroying his son's career. I saw it differently. I believed I was expanding what his son could become as a basketball player. He eventually became one of the top guards in his country, played for the national team in international and Olympic competition, and had a successful professional career. I also coached a young player whose body changed dramatically in a very short period of time. He went from around 5'9" to 6'5", and eventually to 6'9". His body was growing faster than his coordination could develop with it. Running, dribbling, passing, and basic movement became difficult for him. Before he came to me, he had been cut from teams and private programs because he lacked those skills. I didn't see a player who couldn't play. I saw a player who needed to be taught. We worked on developing those areas, and eventually he became a perimeter player in college. I had similar experiences with female players. I coached 2 6'4" players who had primarily been post players in high school. We developed their perimeter skills while continuing to take advantage of their height and ability to play inside. Both eventually went on to play Division I basketball at the perimeter. These are just a few examples of why I believe so strongly in developing the player before defining the position. When I began coaching in the United States, this philosophy took on another challenge: time. At UAB, we were competing for players against programs with greater recruiting reach and exposure, like Auburn and Alabama. We couldn't always recruit the finished players those programs could attract. We had to identify players we believed could be developed and do much of that work in-house. The difference was the pace of development. We couldn't wait 3 years for a freshman to begin performing at a junior level. We had to shorten that gap. We needed freshmen developing quickly enough to contribute during their first year while continuing to improve throughout their college careers. That put greater responsibility on us as teachers and coaches. We had to identify what the player could become, determine what needed to improve, and find the best way to teach it without skipping the fundamentals. That became one of the ways we could compete against programs with greater recruiting reach and exposure. If we couldn't always recruit the finished product, we had to become better and faster at developing it. That experience and the reputation I developed for player development also helped me later in my international professional coaching career and when I ran my own academy. I developed relationships with agents who represented players my clubs normally didn't have the financial resources to sign. Some of those agents were willing to place their players with us because they knew how I developed players. They knew their players would be taught, challenged, and given an opportunity to expand their game. They also knew that after one season, that player could leave as a better basketball player with greater marketability for the next opportunity. That trust meant a lot to me because it showed that people outside our program recognized the value of our development process. This approach to player development is also at the foundation of my positionless basketball philosophy. If I teach a tall player to play on the perimeter, I am not taking away that player's ability to play inside. I am adding another dimension to that player's game. Now that player can use height and size around the basket and bring those same physical advantages to the perimeter. Positionless basketball, to me, doesn't mean 5 guards or 5 players doing exactly the same thing. players still have different strengths and different roles. It means I don't allow a position to determine the limits of what a player can learn or what that player can do on the floor. This also became important in another part of my basketball analytics philosophy, exploring mismatches. If I have a tall player who can handle the basketball and play on the perimeter, that player will often be defended by another tall player. Now I can bring that defender away from the basket and use my player's speed, agility, and perimeter skills to create an advantage, to score, force the defender to foul, and possibly get that player into foul trouble early in the game. And because my player can also play inside, we still have another option closer to the basket. Developing the complete basketball player gives our positionless offense more flexibility and more options. The player's development creates the options. My responsibility as a coach is to recognize where the advantage is and how we can use it. That is how player development connects to basketball analytics for me. Throughout my career, this has become one of the trademarks of how I teach, coach, and develop players. Develop the basketball player first. Don't allow height or a position to decide too early what that player can or cannot become. The player standing in front of us today may not be the player we see a year, 2 years, or 3 years from now. As coaches and teachers, we need to recognize that potential, understand what needs to be developed, and know how to teach it. That, to me, is player development. Well, that wraps up today's episode. Thank you for listening to the Coach C Basketball Analytics Podcast. I look forward to having you join me in the next episode.